And we are on page 41. We're in the middle of a letter which we put into the category of faith and understanding, although the second half, the last part of this letter, speaks about a second question that the questioner had asked, which is not so much about faith and understanding, although it's a very important and interesting subject. I hope you'll find it to be that way as well. And I'm going to position it as best as I can to for everyone to benefit from it, because it's definitely a challenging subject. And so this is my introduction to this subject. It's challenging because it questions a very basic style of life that most of us are accustomed to, simply because that's the way most of the world operates, definitely in the Western world. And so because of that, it seems to me that because of that, it's very difficult for someone who is so accustomed to a certain behavior to begin to see it differently. And that's what the challenge is going to be. And if I'm wrong about what I'm saying, meaning your experience is different because I'm only supposing, then I would love to hear. So it's where it says conduct unbecoming. With regard to your second question concerning social dancing. So she asked, the questioner, I don't know if it's a he or she, the questioner asked about dancing, of men and women dancing is essentially what it is. So, you go out, whether it's a celebration like a wedding, or you just go to a bar, or whatever it is, or you go to a dance, right? And you want to dance with your spouse, you want to dance with a friend, whatever it may be. That's what this is talking about. And the questioner, we don't know exactly what they asked, but they asked, like, I suppose from the response, what's the issue with having what we would call in the religious community mixed dancing? So the answer is actually already to be found in your own letter, the Rebbe says, in which you write that the conduct of some of the people indulging in dancing and similar activity leaves much to be desired. So I guess the questioner acknowledged that when you have dancing, there are people who conduct themselves in ways which are not, we'll say, far from modest. And so the Rebbe says, there's your answer to your question. These then shows the dangers inherent in such conduct, which is not in accordance with the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law. So the Rebbe says that the fact that people behave in ways which are not appropriate when they engage in this activity of mixed dancing shows you the dangers that this takes, the dangers of where it takes people to. And the Rebbe says it's not aligned with the code of Jewish law. So meaning that there's explicitly, according to Jewish law, which of course Jewish law is not only legal law in the sense that we're familiar with it, but it's also laws which are spiritual laws, divine laws. So Jewish law forbids men and women publicly dancing together. For obviously those whose conduct has so deteriorated did not start right away on that level. For as you write, they also only wanted to have some innocent fun. So the Rebbe points out what the process is that leads to the problem. And that is that people don't deteriorate immediately. It just starts with some innocent fun. But one thing leads to another. But one must bear in mind where this leads to. Clearly, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is not idle. The Yetzer Hara knows that if he should approach a Jewish girl or boy who are religious and want to remain so, and tempt them right away to transgress an explicit law of the Shulchan Aruch, of the Code of Jewish law, they will not listen to the evil inclination, to the Yetzer Hara. On the other hand, if he should come and tell them to indulge in something seemingly innocent, which only an overtly strict rabbi considers reprehensible, that's what the evil inclination would say. This is the first step for the trap, to ensnare the unwary boy or girl into eventually breaking also the explicit laws of Shulchan Aruch. This is why our sages said to keep away from a bad neighbor and a bad friend, as we also learned in Ethics of Our Fathers and Pirkei Avos. See, here too, one may ask, what is wrong if I live in a house where there's a bad neighbor? But the reason is the same as above. Because it starts with one thing, but the end is a very different place than where it starts. Hence the joke that you may have heard. We have a little joke that when people ask why you're not allowed to do certain things, we always joke and say it may lead to dancing. But the dancing actually is not the problem in and of itself. The problem is that the dancing leads to what the dancing leads to, actually. As for the question, how to best overcome the temptations of the Yetzer Hara, the best way is not to let him get to first base. The moment we begin, if a boy tells a girl that I cannot dance with you, right? So they have ended the possibility of physical interaction. The moment the boy says, look, I can dance with you, but I just want you to know that I can't go further than this, right? The moment we feed our animal soul, and I would love to hear any comments if you feel otherwise. So then we are now making ourselves far more vulnerable, because it's much harder to stop for ourselves. It's much harder for us to stop something we have already started arousing ourselves with at a later stage. And that's why we stop it before he gets to first base, as the Rebbe writes. In other words, when an undesirable thought occurs, so you see how early the Rebbe is starting this. When an undesirable thought occurs, it's necessary to dismiss it at once from the mind. One should dismiss that thought immediately, because if we ponder the thought, we are already engaging in a way that now can lead us to a further stage. However, inasmuch as the mind must be occupied, however, a mind is always a running machine. It never stops. So if you're going to take your mind off of this thought, it is possible to disengage from one thought only by engaging it in another. Therefore, when any undesirable thought does occur, one must at once begin to think about good things, how to benefit oneself and others, and the like. In other words, the Rebbe says, it's not enough just to stop thinking about something. We actually have to replace that thought with positive thinking. That may be why we have a commandment to study Torah whenever we have free time. This way our minds are occupied with productive thinking. With regard to the question of how to develop a greater love for the Torah and for God, so this must have been the last question that the person asked. How do you develop a greater love for Torah and for God? In general, all good things come from the study of the Torah and the observance of the mitzvos. As it is written, if you will walk in my statutes, to which Rashi comments, if you will exert yourself in the Torah, then God promises I will give you your rains in their due season, and all material and spiritual blessings mentioned there. In other words, the Rebbe says something very simple. All good things come from Torah and mitzvos. So if a person wants good things, a general rule, engage in Torah study, engage in the observance of mitzvahs. That's a general rule. Because all good things come from that. And I guess the Rebbe is also suggesting that through a person engaging in Torah mitzvahs, that's how they develop a greater love for Torah and for God. I suggest, clearly this is a man, I suggest that you should have your tefillin checked if they have not been checked within the past 12 months, and that before you put them on every weekday morning, you should put aside a small coin for charity. The latter, that means giving the coin to charity, should be done b'li neder, without a vow. Because when a person does something 3 times consecutively, according to halachic law, Jewish law, you are now bound legally to do it every day because you've done it 3 days in a row. So therefore, you should start doing it by saying, b'li neder, I'm doing it without taking on a vow. So in case you miss a day, it's not a problem. In answer to another question of yours, it is self-understood that all the mail that is addressed to me is opened by me alone and is of course confidential. Interesting that the Rebbe writes that. By the way, the Rebbe was very strict about his mail. The Rebbe was very strict that he signed personally every letter. They didn't have a stamp which was recommended to him, etc. Okay, so we had three things that we just discussed here. One is the idea of mixed dancing, why Jewish law forbids it. The second is how to bring many blessings into your life. That's by following the laws of studying the Torah and observing mitzvos. And the third is that the Rebbe's any correspondence with the Rebbe's is completely confidential. Any questions or comments?
Rabbi,
Yes.
I don't understand why. I can understand if you're not married to someone, dancing to someone outside because it leads to other things. But if you're married to someone, I don't understand why it's negative to what it can lead to that's negative.
Did you ever hear a story of someone cheating on their spouse?
I've heard of it, but I can't understand why people would do that either.
Okay, thank God you're blessed. But for those who do understand, they understand the vulnerability of this. Now, of course, there's no problem for someone to dance with their spouse, but to go to an environment where many people are dancing with their spouse, that leads to many different things because we then see other people. We then often look at other people. Entire movies are built on this, and it puts people in a very vulnerable spot. And human beings, one of the ways that we go through life with honesty is when we can acknowledge our vulnerabilities. There are many people who cannot acknowledge, they are in complete denial about human vulnerabilities. So their vulnerabilities in particular. So they just won't acknowledge it. They'll be in denial of it. And that one cannot go through life honestly that way. So what the Rebbe is simply saying is that this is a very basic, inherent, universal human vulnerability. And if we want to have integrity to our values, then we need to have safeguards. So this is a very basic safeguard that Jewish law has put in place. And considering that, that this also damages so many relationships and families, it would be wise for us as a society to give more consideration to this. That's essentially what the Rebbe is saying. To me, and I was raised this way, so that therefore it's much more natural to me. This is very logical. I always wonder whether other people see it that way. So, if anyone has any other comments on it, I'd love to hear. We have a comment in the chat box. While mixed dancing can truly lead to serious transgressions, drinking alcohol often leads to inappropriate behavior, as well as alcohol overuse and abuse. But wine and other alcohol is part of all Shabbos and holiday and most celebrations, plus allowing Kiddush Club and shuls. Okay, so I think what you're asking is, it would seem that the way people, the way religious Jews drink alcohol on Shabbos is quite problematic as well. Is that the question?
Well, I'm not saying that anybody who has wine and Kiddush is an alcoholic, and I'm not saying that we should ban alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
But there is alcohols everywhere, and maybe some people say that's good because then the child doesn't see it as forbidden pleasure, that they try to sneak it and whatever. But it is a problem. I don't know what the rate of alcoholism among Jews is probably the same as everywhere else. But first of all, alcohol can result in inappropriate behavior. But apart from that, there's a lot of alcohol. And it's very easy to be like drunk two or three times every week. Not to mention Kiddush Club. I don't think they have that. You don't have that at Newtown, do you?
No, we don't. We absolutely don't accept that.
That's obviously, for whatever reason, individual synagogues
Yeah.
allow that. Like in the middle of Torah service, they go off and drink a lot.
Yep.
And then they come back and they're drunk. I've not seen it, but I've heard about it. I read about it. It sounds horrible.
Yeah.
For the rest of the Torah service, I'm Nutza, these men are.
So what's your point, Joyce?
So why are we allowing? If we don't allow mixed dancing because it's not that the dancing itself is the problem, because it leads to more inappropriate, really, adultery or, sex outside of marriage, etc. So then, why are we leading to alcohol that can lead to inappropriate behavior as well as just alcoholism and a lot of illness, and it's difficult.
Yeah, it's a great.
I'm being difficult. I apologize.
You're not being difficult. You're asking a very good question. And I agree with you that many people don't know, don't drink appropriately, and they drink too much, and they're very ugly when they are drunk, right? And it's ugly, and it's wrong. So let's start there. Let's just start that behavior is wrong, right? Now the question is, what do we as a society, and we'll say as a leaders of a Jewish society, of the Jewish society, do in that regard? So we have to assess a number of things, and I'm not giving you an answer. I'm giving you my thoughts that would contribute maybe to what I think should be considered in regards into that answer. So in general, to forbid alcohol, we're not going to do, because alcohol is a part of religious observance. So now it's limiting alcohol. That's a much harder thing to do. So it's much harder to, if when it comes to mixed dancing, we say mixed dancing is forbidden. One cannot have mixed dancing in public, right? If you want to go into your bedroom and dance with your spouse, you can do it all night long and be as romantic as you like. But in the public space, that's forbidden. But with alcohol, we can't do that. We can't do that because we have, we have observances that we do with alcohol. The only thing I would say, by the way, also as far as what is good for kids, is only Kiddush, where they get a very minimal amount of light alcohol, relatively speaking. I mean, it's not hard alcohol, which is wine, as opposed to hard alcohol, right? Which my father would, as kids, would call a vaccine. But when kids see people drinking hard alcohol in excess, it's not a good thing for kids to see at all, actually, and it doesn't help kids at all. And it doesn't take them away from the temptation. Otherwise, we should start giving all kids marijuana and all types of other things also, or smoking it in front of them. So it's a tricky thing. So and this part of what leaders have to assess is how what we can limit and what also can be realistically limited. That's also a big assessment when the rabbis, I'm talking about from hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, made decrees. There were some decrees they made that did not take hold because the masses were simply not able to follow them, and therefore they did not become Jewish law. That's part of the system of Jewish law, is that when the rabbis make a decree, the masses of the community of the Jewish people have to be able to abide by it. If we see that they simply cannot abide by it, then it never takes hold. We have different examples of that, not many, but some. So I think alcohol is one of the trickier areas because it is a way of life in the sense that we drink wine. It's a normal way of life for normal people. But then again, there are people who take advantage of it. And so that, I think that would then go into the category of things that local municipalities, if you will, which would mean the local rabbis of particular synagogues, would have to rein in to the best of their ability. In our modern day, I'll say of the last 20, 30 years, this has been a very big problem, which rabbis have struggled greatly with reining in. And because chutzpah is at a high nowadays, therefore the respect and the leverage that a rabbi carries is much more limited than it was when rabbis played a more authoritative role maybe 60, 70 years ago. And so that's also part of the challenge. And so every rabbi in his synagogue tries to deal with that to the best of their ability. And sometimes it's best not to fight something that you can't control. And that's what I think many rabbis have discovered, depending on their type of community. There are other communities where it would never fly, but it just depends on the type of community. I hope I'm answering your question somewhat.
I was thinking not that we're going to remake halakha, but you'd say, why is alcohol allowed at all, period? And I know it's part of Kiddush. All right, anything from grape is fine, grape juice is fine, no alcohol. I'm not advocating total abolition of alcohol, but you could say mixed dancing leads to certain impropriety. alcohol leads to alcoholism and other impropriety, we'll get rid of alcohol. And I'm not going to I'm not saying we have to do that. But I mean, it could be done. I mean, whether it's a takana or whatever. I mean, I'm not asking.
So
it could have been done centuries ago. I mean,
Yeah.
Noah got drunk and it was pretty bad,
Yeah.
etc. But
these are all.
I'm just sort of bringing it up to. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not being devil's advocate, but really, it is problematic.
Okay, so in general, with all human challenges, the question is, should we outlaw things to control it? That's a general. It's a question of a general approach of how to deal with things. Now I'm going to get back to mixed dancing in a minute to say why it is. It is in a class of its own in just a second. But in general, when it comes to human failings, of which we have many human weaknesses, do we create an environment where it's not possible for a person to then succumb to that weakness? Is that the approach we should take? And in general, that is not the approach that we take, because human beings have weaknesses and we have challenges, and we have to learn to overcome those challenges and weaknesses. So it's more of, we're not here to control. We don't want, I don't want to get political, but we don't want big government where we're controlling what people do. We want people to rise up, and that's our entire purpose in this world, to rise up and bring out the best of ourselves. And that will come at a price that some people won't, no question about it. Alcohol would be a very good example of one of those things. The uniqueness about mixed dancing is that mixed dancing is associated with sexuality. Sexuality is an area that the Talmud acknowledges in the language of the Talmud, ein apotropos la'arayos, which means that there's no safeguard for sexuality. The Talmud tells us numerous stories of some of the greatest rabbis who almost succumbed or actually succumbed to sexual temptation, and these were great, great people. Meaning that this is seen as an area, and I believe this is widely accepted. Surely this is the way I experience it, is that sexuality is an overwhelming human weakness beyond other human weaknesses, and therefore, in this regard, we have safeguards, not controls, but safeguards. Right? We don't control people, but we put up safeguards to help people in regulating themselves. So that's the uniqueness of the area of sexuality. Now, one can argue about alcohol, and I will tell you that there are people who do, like Rabbi Dr. Twersky, who was involved with alcoholism. So to him, because I'm going to say that I think that because he was so involved and saw so many cases, he saw alcoholism as a huge, huge problem. Okay, I know, but we don't find, the bottom line is we don't find that that the rabbis felt that has to be reined in the same way that sexuality is, and therefore we don't find in halacha those levels of restriction. They leave it up to the individual to regulate themselves. Okay. We're good, everyone? Any other comments on this?
Thank you.
I just have a comment. It's not really about alcohol, but it's being involved with the opposite sex. I know in occupation, sometimes you can be in an occupation like Dave was, where there was a lot of women. He worked in a hospital, and there were a lot of women working in hospitals, and he had women approach him about things that they shouldn't have really been approaching him about. And he just turned them off. No, I am not interested. How come there's a thing against social dancing, there's not a thing against working in an environment where it could also happen?
So you're saying it could happen in a work environment?
Oh, it definitely can. They were
Yeah.
approached by many women.
Yeah.
They come and tell me about it and say, I told them, no, I'm not interested.
So this happens every single day, and there are many marriages which are affected by it, and that's the reason why in halacha, which we're not discussing now the details of Jewish law, but there are detailed laws about what type of environment a man and woman can be in, and how they are not, they should never be secluded. This is all relates to that. and one needs to acknowledge that the human vulnerability in this area, so that we don't put ourselves in a compromising position. Because if a man and woman will seclude themselves supposedly for even for to work on something in some business, that can very easily slide, and we have to be honest about that before we have the problem. And the way we do that is by making sure we do not sit in seclusion. And while there can still be different types of feelings and everything, at least there are some limitations, and so that will limit actually going beyond that. And that's really the point here.
Women would come up to him right up in the open, approaching him.
We all know. Okay. Okay, so let's go to, we're ready to go to the next letter, everyone? Okay, let's go to the next letter. Again, on faith and understanding, greeting and blessing. This is from the year 1957, as you can see. Since the Torah and mitzvahs and the Jewish way of life comes from God and his infinite wisdom, they are not subject to man's approval and selection. We're not seeking anyone's approval, and we shouldn't seek anyone's approval for God's commandments. Why? Because it's coming from an infinite wisdom that a human wisdom cannot comprehend. Human reason is necessarily limited and imperfect. This is, again, we repeat this. We've had this in countless letters already, in a number of these letters. This is a bedrock that we need to instill within ourselves, so that we have full faith in Torah and mitzvahs, and then we ask questions on the faith. So we're rock solid, we're committed, we're aligned with God, and now we have questions, and we can discuss those questions as much as we'd like, but the questions don't weaken our commitment. Human reason is necessarily limited and imperfect. Its deficiencies are obvious, since with time and study it improves and gains knowledge. We see that we gain knowledge with time. So clearly, we understand more as time goes on, and personal opinions change. To confine God to human judgment would violate even common sense. This is really, really important. This is bedrock. It's something the Rebbe repeats all the time. In our long history, we have had the greatest human minds possible. Here's another point the Rebbe makes, which is a very powerful point for me. In fact, for me, the greatest human minds possible for me, in my experience, is the Rebbe, who I have unbelievable trust and faith in because of my entire exposure to the Rebbe, which I continue to be exposed to the Rebbe by new teachings that I've never learned yet. And in all of my teachings, there has never been a single crack or question in the Rebbe's integrity, honesty, alignment, and holiness. So therefore, I think to myself at times that even though I don't understand this, if the Rebbe, whose mind was brilliant, because the Rebbe had a brilliant mind, was comfortable with this, that's good enough for me. Am I going to think that I can understand better than the Rebbe? I don't have nearly the comprehension of the Rebbe. So in our long history, we have had the greatest human minds possible, who nevertheless realized their limitations when it came to the knowledge of God and his laws and precepts. We have had great thinkers and philosophers who not only fully accepted the Torah mitzvahs, but have been our guiding light to this day. While the dissident groups and individuals, whose number are very few, were cut from our people and either disappeared completely, or worse still, continued as painful thorns in the flesh of our people and humanity at large. Anyone who's familiar with our history requires no illustrations or proofs of the aforesaid. That we know that we have greatest philosophers. There's plenty they didn't understand, and they were fully committed to God. And you had people who asked all of their different questions, and they were not committed to God. They were committed to their own intelligence, and they fell off the bandwagon. They're no longer. There's no remnant of Jewishness or Jewish people from them. And the ones who didn't disappear remained yet. I'm going to say, the Rebbe didn't put that word in, but I'll say yet. They remain thorns in our side until eventually, after 3, 4, 5 generations, there are no Jews left from them. So I trust you will reflect on the above, and you will cherish the great and sacred knowledge which has been handed down to each and every one of us. in the midst of our people, generation after generation, from the revelation at Mount Sinai to the present day. So Rebbe is basically encouraging the person to say, don't let your questions, get in the way of your faith. You can ask questions. You can debate them your whole life, and that's fine. And with time, you'll get more and more answers as you understand things more and more. But your faith and your commitment cannot be dependent on your understanding, which is so limited. Accepting this sacred tradition unconditionally and without questions does not mean that there's no room for any intellectual understanding. Within our limitations, there is a great deal which we can understand and which we can further enrich, provided the approach is right. For God, in His infinite grace, has given us insight into various aspects of His commandments, an insight which grows deeper with our practicing them in our daily life and making them our daily experience. In this way, the Jew attains a true peace of mind and a harmonious and happy life. Not only spiritually, but also physically. In other words, when we are aligned with the will of God, not only do we have a beautiful spiritual life, we actually have a beautiful and harmonious and happy physical life, and fully realize how happy one is to be son or daughter of this great and holy nation, our Jewish people. Hoping to hear good news from you with blessing. I just want to highlight one point that the Rebbe made here, which I sort of read through. For God, in His infinite grace, has given us insight into various aspects of His commandments, an insight which grows deeper with our practicing them in our daily lives. He's saying 2 points here. The first point is to realize that anything we understand about a mitzvah, and we have a lot of understanding about many mitzvahs and many things the Torah teaches, is God taking His infinite wisdom, which we cannot understand, and filtering it down to a level that our human mind can digest. So even everything we do understand is a filtered version of an infinite brilliance. Number one. Number two, the Rebbe says, is part of actually having growing and deeper insight into a mitzvah only happens by practicing them in our daily life. Because when you engage with something and experience it, you have an understanding and an appreciation of it in a different way. I can explain to you from today until tomorrow how meaningful it is to do a favor to another person. But if you as a person never did a favor to someone else, which of course is not the case, but if that were the case, you would never really understand what that pleasure is until you do a favor for another person. So there are certain things, there are certain aspects of things that we cannot really get unless we go through the experience itself. Like many people will say about Shabbos, that one cannot experience the beauty of Shabbos until they experience Shabbos. Otherwise, it's an idea and you don't really understand it. And I would even venture to say this, and I'll even extend an invitation, that if you've never observed Shabbos in a full manner, right, according to Jewish law, which you can do by staying in a home where Shabbos is observed. We don't turn lights on and off. You don't use your phone. You prepare your coffee in the morning in a particular manner. All of these things. So until that happens, one cannot really appreciate the beauty of Shabbos. So my invitation is, if you want to have that experience, let me know, and we'll be happy to host you for Shabbos. And you'll find something fascinating. You're not going to be in your own bed. The things are going to be very different. And still, the whole experience is like you suddenly are now in an immersive 25-hour experience. And that's a whole different experience than coming to a Shabbos dinner. Shabbos dinner is just a limited experience of the Shabbos. And that's the point the Rebbe is making here. Okay, we're ready for the next letter, everyone? I guess so. Let's go for it. Letter 15. This the Rebbe is writing to a study group. The Rebbe writes, Shalom ubracha. Shalom ubracha means shalom is peace, ubracha is and blessing. I was pleased to learn of the formation of a study group in your community, and I wish you much success. This is in it doesn't say Worcester, Massachusetts. Yeah. Although the name study group implies that study and the acquisition of knowledge are the main objectives of your group, The first step to real understanding of God and the deeper aspects of life is the realization that we cannot and must not make our own understanding a prerequisite condition of our practicing the divine precepts. The Rebbe goes right back to this point. The Rebbe says that while studying is beautiful, when you call it a study group, please understand that we cannot be confined to our understanding of things. We have to understand that that is not a prerequisite to observing divine precepts. In other words, we cannot say to God, let us first understand your laws, then we will follow them. When I understand, then I'll follow it. When our people came into being on receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai, they declared, and this is famous, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do first, then we will understand or try to understand. Understanding comes after doing. There's a commitment we make, and then in that commitment we will try and understand. This proclamation has remained and the reason why is this? We already know from the previous letter. The main reason why this is because a human can't understand so much of what of God's infinite wisdom. And it would be ridiculous. It would be really unreasonable for anyone to expect to understand the infinite wisdom of God. A second thing is that by doing, it enables us to understand. Because there's a lot that you can't understand until you experience. So the Jew must observe the mitzvahs whether or not he understands their deeper significance. His experience of the mitzvahs eventually will develop the faculties of his understanding, and in this he has divine assistance. So again, he emphasizes by doing the mitzvahs, that will develop the faculties of understanding, and now you will have divine assistance. God's going to actually give you extra power to be able to understand this mitzvah. Jews have likewise always realized that our history is not shaped by understandable natural laws or forces. Now it's another major point the Rebbe makes here. This, I believe, is one of the fundamental points that the Rebbe emphasized through his leadership. We always realize that our history is not shaped by understandable natural laws or forces, but our history is shaped by supreme providence, which is above and beyond our understanding. To go and explain that the Jewish people even exist today is not logical. There's no reasonable way to explain that. To explain, if you just look at what's going on in the world today, right? The fierce opposition to Israel. It is really shocking that Israel is so powerful right now, despite the unbelievable opposition. Like the whole UN is anti-Israel in the most biased way, right? So they have a clear agenda. And it's amazing that with all of those countries teaming together, Israel remains even stronger than they were before October 7th. Why? Because it's not we are not shaped by understandable and natural laws or forces, but by supreme providence. So we have to understand that our entire basis, if we're going to approach Judaism as Jews with understanding, that's going to be the foundation. We are weakening ourselves terribly. The whole power is that we are connected to an infinite God, not to a finite understanding, to an infinite God. A case in point, and this must have been, let's go back to the time of year. Yeah, the Rebbe wrote this letter. It's addressed on Purim of 1952. So the Rebbe says a case in point is the holiday of Purim, which we celebrate today. So Achashverosh, an absolute ruler, had signed, sealed, and delivered the decree to annihilate the entire Jewish population in all the 127 provinces of his vast empire. So just briefly, you may or may not know the story. Achashverosh was the king during the story of Purim, which was this occurred about 2,400 years ago. Achashverosh ruled over almost the entire world at that time. And so 127 provinces were part of his vast empire. And he sealed a decree to annihilate the entire Jewish people, that any Jew needs to be killed, and that was to happen within a year, in a year's time. There seemed not a glimmer of escape. How do you escape this? Every Jew has to be killed. The Jews could not logically understand why such a terrible decree was hanging over their heads. The Jews couldn't understand logically why was this happening. Like, what did they do so terrible that the king wants to kill him? But Haman had accused them of adhering to their own laws and way of life. Why did Haman hate the Jews? Because we live as Jews. We don't live like everyone else. We live as Jews. But if he was right, then precisely for this reason, they should not have become exposed to such mortal danger. The Jewish mind at that time, imagine you're living as a Jew, right? You're serving God. And all of a sudden you find a decree against you that you and your people have to be annihilated because of the way you're living. You're going to ask God, what in the world is going on here? I am serving you. We are serving you. We're doing what you want, infinite God, and that is what's bringing us to our death? Right? Good question. So, if Haman was right, then precisely for this reason, they should not have become exposed to such mortal danger. Inasmuch as the Torah is Torah's Chaim, we call the Torah of life, and the law of life and the way of life, not death. So, any thinking Jewish mind has to question what in the world is going on here. Yet, what did the Jewish people do? They didn't all stop being Jews and living as Jews. They didn't take their mezuzahs, God forbid, down from their doors. Yet during the entire year that the decree was pending, the Jews remained steadfast in their faith and loyalty to God. Although there was but one avenue of escape from certain death, as our sages tell us, that they did have a way to get out. There was an out. What was the out? That was precisely the opposite, abandonment of their way of life and merging with the non-Jewish population. They could have simply said, you know what, we're getting killed for this, we're done. We're going to live like the Gentiles around us, drop the religion. And that would have been very logical. But the Jews did not act logical. Even though they probably had the biggest question in the world, that how is it that the law of life that God has given us is bringing us death? It's almost like the binding of Isaac. God tells Abraham that through Isaac will your offspring continue, and then God says, bring up Isaac as a sacrifice. It's exactly what's happening here. But not a single Jew or Jewess chose this apparently logical solution. During that time, I don't know how many Jews lived during that time. There were millions. And not a single Jew chose this logical approach. Why? Because Jews are not embedded in logic. We are embedded in the infinite, and upon that, we have enormous logic. We're very smart people. We produce amazing things for the world. We analyze and dissect things logically in the most unbelievable way, in the Talmud, in Torah study. But that is not our bedrock. That sits on top of our bedrock. The bedrock is faith in the infinite. Their salvation also came through a miraculous chain of events, meaning miraculous, not natural, not logical, which completely turned the wheel of fortune from destruction to renewed life, physical and spiritual, and from mourning to gladness. Now, the words of the Megillah are, these days shall be remembered and practiced. In the Megillah, it says, they wrote the Megillah a year after the whole story of Purim, as a remembrance. And they wrote that these days, the days of Purim, have to be remembered and practiced. And they can be understood better. Remembering our relationship with God must immediately lead to our practicing His precepts. Through practicing God's precepts, despite any inclination to the contrary, stemming from one's inner enemy. So when we practice what God tells us to do, despite any inclination, any pulling from our inner enemy, which is our evil inclination, or external hindrances or influences, the Jew remains rooted in God's Torah and His mitzvahs. That means we become rooted in the infinite, way beyond logic, which make our people indestructible. And this is why we are an indestructible people. All of the logic that secular people bring to the table of being reasonable, all of them are taking us down the wrong path. Is this in alignment with what God wants or not? Alignment with God entrenches us in the indestructible. And if it's alignment with intelligence which is not aligned with God, then we are going down a very dangerous path, because we are deviating from the secret sauce of the Jewish people. I trust that you will follow this true approach and will extend good influences throughout your community with Purim greeting and blessings. Okay. Yes.
So, just a statement. All of this is beautiful, and it's supposed to be that way, right?
Yep.
But again, this is just based on personal experience. 3 of the generations of mine in previous 3 generations strayed, and they strayed from Judaism for the reasons, not because they didn't think it was good, not they didn't think it was valuable, because of, again, there are a lot of people that didn't, where they were, growing up and where they were living, but it was mostly, pogroms, the Holocaust, and so many, and we're talking about 3 generations. Again, it's just a fact. I understand, but there were so many people after World War II that just stopped. Like, I met so many people that I have a friend who's dating a man, and she's been dating him for 3 years, and she brought him to a dinner, and we're talking, and I'm like, oh my God, I think he's Jewish. So I'm like, are you Jewish? He goes, I don't know, let me call my mom. And right there on the spot, he calls his mom, and he goes, Mom, am I Jewish? And this guy ended up, he brought me, it's insane, it's an insane story. He never knew. He's a 40-some-year-old man who never knew he was a Jew, and obviously there's so many stories like that. And it's, again, as you're saying it's so beautiful, and I agree, and I'm trying to really hard to live this life and teach it to my kids. But what about that portion of the people? God doesn't make mistakes, so how's that?
I'm not hearing a clear question.
I don't know if there is a question. That's
okay.
We're talking about beautiful things, and what Rabbi is saying is, again, it's beautiful, and and God doesn't make mistakes. So I guess the question is, if we're not logical people, how come there's such a huge chunk of Jewish people that was placed in these kind of predicaments and lost their Judaism?
So in simply put, God needs them where they're at in that situation. Why, I don't know, but that's what God needs. So it's not that God doesn't make mistakes. God organizes everything precisely the way He wants it to be. This guy, by no fault of his own, had no idea that he's Jewish, and he only found out when God wanted him to find out, which was through you, which was at that moment, which is really beautiful. That's all I can say to that. However, and I think what's important here is, I think what's most important for us to think about is, how do I understand being a Jew, and how can I be more connected to this idea that the experience of the Jew, is the experience of the infinite, and not to let my being Jewish be a logical experience, but be a super rational experience, as I like to say, with as much understanding as I can add to that. And to understand that's the power of the Jewish people, and to be that example to other Jews, so that when they come up with their rationale about what we should be doing and shouldn't be doing, and why they won't do this or that, to actually bring this idea to the table, that we are an impossible people, and we are an infinite people, because we are connected to an infinite being, which is way beyond anything we can comprehend, and therefore our commitment needs to be such as well. Does that make sense?
Totally, it does.
Okay.
I have to quit trying to be logical.
No, we all do. This is an inherent challenge, because logic is a very strong part of our humanity. And so, and by the way, also, like I always like to add, is that our mind naturally, with anything, because its job is to try and figure things out. So anything that happens, our mind jumps in right away, starts trying to figure it out. And so we have to train our minds to say that there are some domains that are too big for you, buddy. So calm down and figure something else out, but this you're not going to. This is not for you to figure out. This is for us to accept. Okay, yeah, I think this is very, very foundational and critical for Jews to understand, because very often we have a tendency of taking logical approaches. I'm going to use an example I always use because it just touched me when I heard it, even though the Rebbe expressed this in many other ways. There was a Hasidic Rebbe, another Hasidic Rebbe, who came to meet the Rebbe. And he was sitting in the Rebbe's office with him, and they were having a conversation. And the man brought up, and he lived in Israel, this other Hasidic Rebbe. And this other Hasidic Rebbe says to the Rebbe that there's a problem. By the way, Israel's been talking about this forever, even though it never became the problem that everyone says it will. But logically, it would seem that it would become a problem. Thank God it hasn't. He said there's a problem with the growing Arab population in Israel, because if it continues to grow at the speed that it grows, then there'll be a majority of Arabs in the country, and then we're going to have a major crisis. So this Hasidic Rebbe suggested to the Rebbe that we start a campaign encouraging the Arabs to use birth control. Now, by the way, the reason why Arabs have so many children is the same reason that religious Jews have so many children. It's for religious reasons, right? So he was advocating, tell them to use birth control. Let's have a campaign encouraging birth control so we limit their population. Okay, will it work? Will it not work? Who knows? But let's just say it would work. So that was his idea. So the Rebbe said, how can you do that? That's forbidden. So the man said, and the Rebbe said, one of the 7 Noahide laws, that means that Gentiles are commanded in, would violate the 7 Noahide laws that Gentiles are commanded in. I'm not going to get into the particulars of it, but that's what the Rebbe said, which was obviously is correct, right? So the man said, but we have a problem. What was the difference between these two people, these two men? The Rebbe was saying there's only one way to making this world a good place and solving problems, and that is in alignment with the creator of the universe. There's no other way it's going to happen. It cannot happen any other way. So if God tells us not to encourage Arabs to do that, then you don't encourage Arabs to do it. You have a problem? Come up with other solutions. Or God will solve the problem. See, that's the point. So we can't go to solving problems by saying it's not reasonable, it can't work. What do you mean? Yeah, in other words, we can say this with so many things. You know how expensive it is to keep kosher, even though it's not so crazy expensive. Maybe it's a little bit expensive, but it's not crazy, right? But you know how expensive it is to keep kosher. You know how expensive it is to send your kids to private school. Do you know what it means to not to be able to do any business on Shabbos? Well, you go on and on and on. All of it is illogical, right? That's exactly right. You're 100% right. It's illogical. And that's the point. That's the point. Am I resonating? Everyone understand what I'm saying? And we have to understand that this is the bedrock of Judaism. And this is now when we are becoming very powerful Jews. And I want to say that in large segments of Judaism, people are not even aware of what I just shared with you. So everything is done logically, right? Like as humans, not as Jews. And the whole power of Judaism is in being Jews, not in being humans. Okay, let's go to letter number 16. You say you're an atheist. That's the title of the letter. From the year 1967, to a doctor who lived in New York. Blessing and greeting, I'm in receipt of your 2 recent letters. With reference to the other topic of our correspondence, namely my suggestion that one's protestations against God, that when one protests against God, they are in themselves proof of belief in the existence of God. So the Rebbe clarifies a point. Perhaps I did not make myself clear in that it is not the negation which I consider to be proof, so much as the manner in which it is expressed. The Rebbe is telling him an interesting thing. You know, it's very interesting. I'm sorry, I'm jumping back now because I just see that there's a comment here. Meanwhile, the Arab birth rate in Israel has gone down significantly without government pressure. Right. To do so. Arab families get the same extent, right? Yeah, very good. Thank you, Joyce. So the Rebbe is making a point over here. Did anyone ever tell you, how can there be a God? How can a good God create Auschwitz? Right? And you can see in their statement how angry they are at God. Right? So the Rebbe says that emotion clearly shows that the person actually believes in God. Because who are you angry at if there's no God? Right? You'd be calm about this. You would say there's no God. Right? But if you're angry at, who are you angry at if there's no God? Right? That's the Rebbe's point. The Rebbe says if a guy comes uses his logic and he says there's no God, okay, so I can believe, I can understand that he believes that he doesn't believe in God. But when someone has emotion to their protest against God, that is the biggest sign that that they actually believe in God. And they just don't know how to reconcile everything. And there's a deep frustration and anger. So they say they don't believe in God. And this is a point the Rebbe makes in numerous letters as well. So he says, for when one declares his atheism once and for all, affirming that henceforth he has no place for God in his thoughts, in his lexicon or daily life, then the matter is settled and closed. Okay, fine, you don't believe in God. End. However, when one asserts that God does not exist, yet at the same time, on seeing an injustice in the world, experiences pain and promptly demands, "Where is God?" What do you mean, where is God? There is no God. What's your question? Where is God? Right? His harping on the same theme again and again is proof that deep in his heart he believes in God, which is such a Jewish thing to do. To say I don't believe in God and get angry at God whenever something happens, because the Jew, of course, always believes in God, which is precisely why he feels so hurt and outraged. Right? Otherwise, if you don't believe in God, if someone doesn't believe in God, the world is a random world. Everything's arbitrary. There's no one controlling or ruling anything. So when a tragedy happens, what are you getting angry about? You have bad luck. People have good luck, people have bad luck. It's all random. If someone's getting angry, that means that they believe that there is some guide or orchestrator to this world, which is God. And that's why they say, how can there be a God? Because they actually believe there is a God. That's the point the Rebbe is making. More importantly still, not only does he believe in a supernatural being in general, but also in one who has all the qualities that Jews attribute to him. Among them, that God takes an interest in human affairs. Right? Because you wouldn't be angry at God if God didn't take an interest in human affairs. Right? God doesn't care, that's why. Right? But obviously, you believe that God does care. Although, if you are righteous, what are you giving to Him? He quotes a verse that there's an aspect of God which is beyond relationship with humans. But furthermore, He is a God who intervenes in the daily life of each and every individual, even to the extent of listening to prayer. And prayer, as the Jew conceives of it, serves the function neither of a tranquilizer nor any other means of emotional relief, likely to meet with the approval of a psychiatrist. So, in other words, the idea of prayer is not to serve as a tranquilizer or emotional relief. It's actually for the purpose of speaking to God that God should resolve something. Some people say that, I don't understand. I prayed to God. God didn't answer. I can't believe there's a God. Right? So on one hand, they're demanding that God should answer them, which means they're acknowledging that God hears them and that God cares. Otherwise, why would you even think that God would answer a puny human being, one of 8 billion, right? And that's why we're upset. So all of that is the greatest testament to our strong belief. So every such deception is contrary to the spirit of all religions, particularly our Torah, which is called the Torah Semis. The daily Amidah includes the prayer for wisdom, understanding, and knowledge from the one who bestows the gracious gift of knowledge. We ask every single day, 3 times a day in the Amidah prayer, for God to give us wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Just as it includes the prayer for healing from the one who heals the sick of his people Israel. In the plain sense of these words, we mean them literally. God gives me wisdom to understand things more deeply. God is the one who brings healing to people who are sick, of course through doctors, but God's the one who's bringing the healing. Of course, I do not need much convincing that our prayers include profound meanings and esoteric allusions in the realm of Kabbalah. It's no question that there are much deeper levels conveyed in our prayers, but that should not obscure the fact that first and foremost, our prayers are the direct expression of dependence, our dependence upon God for the satisfaction of our elementary needs, bread to eat and raiment to wear. I am, of course, aware of the objections raised to the above, some of them mentioned in your recent article and in earlier pieces. Specifically, it is asked, how is it possible for a being who's incorporeal, right, not physical, who's formless and is unchanging, how can such a being be swayed by the prayers for rain in a time of drought or by other such requests? In other words, if God is this infinite being, people ask, what, you think this infinite being is affected or pays attention to just one little human being who's one of 8 billion? We're like a little ant. Do you get affected when an ant is walking across the sidewalk? So that's the question people ask. But, the Rebbe says, good question, but the fact that the human intellect cannot comprehend something proves nothing more than that the intellect of a human is limited. And so we don't understand why an infinite being would care about what we do. And we were already told long ago that he is incomprehensible to those who comprehend by the senses. A human who understands things by their senses cannot comprehend God. I'm sorry, I'm going to go a few minutes over time because I want to finish this letter. I hope that's okay. There is no need, therefore, to harp upon a problem with which Jews and Gentiles have been grappling from time immemorial, and which continues to challenge us today. I am certain that it is not because of this bothersome question that the unbeliever lost his faith. But on the contrary, having lost his faith, he seeks to appease his conscience by cooking up this problem. You have to hear this because this is very, very powerful. The Rebbe says that when people ask questions to prove that there is no God, or that God doesn't care, what they're really doing is trying to pacify and appease their conscience, which is feeling guilty because they have a weak faith. So they're trying to justify it with all of these proofs, which are old stories and old arguments, which regardless, a human being is limited in our understanding and therefore cannot understand God fully anyway. And by the way, I just want you to know that most arguments that people make are, many arguments that people make are simply to appease their conscience. They're not genuine philosophical arguments. They're just to make themselves feel good emotionally. Or maybe they live a certain way and they want to justify the way they live. So just by saying, but God, whatever.